Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 2023 News Philanthropy Summit. I am Allie Vanier, Program Manager with the Lenfest Institute for Journalism. Just a couple of quick housekeeping items before we jump into the session. Our event principles are on the main page of the Zoom events platform, and I will also share them in the chat in a moment. We have closed captioning available. So if you would like to see those, you can just click the closed caption button at the bottom of your screen. We are recording this session, and we will share out the recording afterwards. And lastly, we are going to have time for audience Q&A at the end. So we welcome your questions for our amazing panel. You can just use the Q&A button at the middle bottom of your screen to submit a question to answer them live. So with all of that said, I'm going to hand it over to Annie to get us started.
Thanks, Allie. Now I am unmuted and we can get going. It's really nice to see all of you on this panel today, and really glad to have so many of you joining us for this session on fundraising for news organizations serving low wealth communities. It's an incredibly important topic and perhaps one of the most challenging. Reader revenue strategies and best practices operate the assumption that a fundraising campaign's target audience has the means to give, and that's not always the case. Our panelists today are leading ventures that serve those that don't have the means to give. And so what can we do about it? How do they manage that? And how can we think about special revenues and resources for our news organizations? This group of really talented and committed leaders is helping to figure this out. But I think you might all agree we're the first to admit that we don't have all the answers. So hopefully we'll learn from each other and learn together today. So I'm just going to start by introducing this great panel in alphabetical order. I have asked for phonetic spellings of everyone's names, and so my apologies in advance if I mess it up. I will do my best. Just wave and say hi when I mention you. I will start with Andrea Bicken, is the Development Director at Documented, where she managed all philanthropic programming for the organization. And she previously served as the Development and Communications Director of Vocal New York, as well as the Development Director at Immigrant Justice Corp. Dana Kester is the founder and editor-in-chief for the collaborative media outlet 100 Days in Appalachia. Dana is also the creative director for the West Virginia University Media Innovation Center. And fascinatingly to me, and such a great topic, she's currently producing a film, Raised by Wolves, a documentary on risk to youth exposed to weaponized mis- and disinformation in social media and online gaming. Marcia Maziris, wave Marcia, is VP of Development for the Prison Journalism Project based in Washington, D.C. Prior to the Prison Journalism Project, she worked at the Center for Public Integrity, the D.C. Public Library, the Institute of Contemporary Art, and the University of Pennsylvania School of Nursing, among others. And finally, Lupita Parra is Development Director for Enlace Latino NC, focused on development and media impact tracking in U.S. and Latin American independent newsrooms. Before her role with Enlace Latino NC, she was at Sembra Media, and I hope you don't mind me letting the cat out of the bag, is today starting her new position as Director of Development for MLK 50. So congratulations, Lupita. We're really honored you're with us on your day one of your new job. So thank you for being here. We'll go over to our slides now, and our terrific panel will walk through this short deck, giving us an update on their work and some of their challenges and opportunities. And then we'll have a conversation together on what we've heard and what we're learning. So we'll take it over to Lupita, who is first on the deck.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us here. For those of you that are participating in the conversation, thank you, Annie, for moderating, and Allie for walking us through this process of outlining, the topics that we want to cover in this dialogue, which is, as you all know, so important. As Annie mentioned, today's my first day as MLK 50's first development director, which I'm so excited about. Thank you all for your encouraging messages already in the chat. But it's also really nice to get this opportunity to speak about some of the insights that I gleaned from a few years of trying our hand at reader revenue at Enlace Latino NC. So to be clear, starting my new role today, but I will be speaking today about Enlace Latino's experience. For those of you that aren't familiar with the work that Enlace Latino does, Enlace Latino is North Carolina's first nonprofit digital Spanish newsroom with a mission to empower the local Latinx Spanish-speaking immigrant community to be involved in these changes that affect them. Enlace turns 5 this year, just so you get a sense of like when that work started, and only recently became designated as a 501c3. So it's been quite the journey towards independence and sustainability. I want to start by explaining how new the concept of reader revenue specifically was to, in our case, a very young newsroom. Reader revenue wasn't something we felt intuitively fit into our revenue strategy. It was something that we ended up exploring through participation in programs like the GNI Startups Lab and the Facebook Meta Reader Revenue Accelerator. And I want to sit with this for a second because I think it's really important to think about, well, why is it that for some newsrooms, this is something new, right? Why is this something that we started exploring on our own? And why is it that we need additional resources to keep trying it? For us, when the kind of information, there are 3 things here. First, when the kind of information you're providing for your primary audience is about access to resources, making the ask feels a little bit tricky, or it can feel a little bit tricky. Second, keep in mind that local independent immigrant serving media has only recently been gaining traction in the local news landscape in the US, which means that revenue models that incorporate reader donations is also really new to us. So something that newsrooms started doing 10 years ago, we are only starting to do now, right? Third, we didn't have the language beyond Newsmatch really to appeal to an audience that isn't used to giving. There's this sense of feels like a cultural barrier to giving to journalism, right? So for us, the challenge, one way to frame that challenge for Enlace has always been, how do we keep doing this while being sensitive to our audience's economic profile, their responsiveness to campaigns of this sort, and the relationship that we're trying to build with them? I will touch on a few of the solutions, but I'll be brief. And we can feel free to send me questions through chat or ask them later. But I do want to say that one of the biggest precursors to trying all of this for Enlace specifically was getting comfortable telling our story. We want to be sensitive to our audience's capacity to give, but we also don't want that relationship to be driven by fear of having the conversation, or worse, excluding them from that critical part of our growth. So I encourage everybody to explore the idea of an invitation, right? An invitation for your audience to understand what it means to produce this journalism. What are the revenue streams that keep you going, and how there is this opportunity for your audience to be a part of that. I think that's a good place to start if some of the previous challenges that I mentioned resonate with you. In our case, we picked one channel to be the main driver of reader revenue, and that was our newsletter, La Tortilla. And so it was a good way to start, right? Picking something, going with it, testing, thanks to the Facebook Reader Revenue Accelerator, which made us pros at that. And finally, and again, I'm happy to touch on this later alongside Andrea, who was a partner in this collaboration, for Giving Tuesday or Giving Newsday this 2022, so just a few months ago, we collaborated with El Tímpano and with Documented, really to be transparent about these challenges facing immigrant-facing media. So I think that's one of the points I want to drive home, is being comfortable sharing that story with your audience and being open about the challenge too. I'll stop there and hand it over to Andrea.
Oh, that's tentative.
All right.
that was really great, Lupita. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. A lot of what I have to say is very similar, but I am hopefully be able to continue to add to this conversation. So my name is Andrea Bicken. I'm the development director at Documented. Documented is a nonprofit news organization that covers issues that are relevant to immigrant communities here in New York City. We do a lot of reporting on things like labor, housing, healthcare, public services. We do a lot of accountability work around institutions that are meant to serve and protect immigrant communities, as well as coverage around things like scams and ways in which communities are open to exploitation. And then we have a robust service journalism program that covers everything from food pantry access, how to get into emergency shelter, how to get a COVID vaccine or a monkeypox vaccine, how to access LGBTQ services, how to open a bank account, all sorts of things of that nature. We publish in 4 languages: English, Spanish, Simplified Chinese, and Haitian Creole. And we have a WhatsApp channel that has a little bit under 4,000 Spanish speakers within it who receive a weekly newsletter. And also, sort of participate in our coverage. The WhatsApp community is really the lifeblood of a lot of our stories. It's a two-way street. So people not only receive the newsletter, but they can write in with anything from, fact-checking pieces of misinformation that they've received, to submitting tips for stories, to asking for questions around accessing services. Sometimes if we're working on a story, we'll go back to that community and say, how common is this happening? And that helps dictate our coverage. Or if a lot of people are all asking questions around the same vein, we know that there's a story there and we will, write something up about it. Going a little bit deeper into that demographic, in a voluntary survey of WhatsApp readers, over half have identified as undocumented, and a growing portion of that demographic are newly arrived asylum seekers who have come to New York City this summer and beyond from places like Florida and Texas. So that is a representative of a big portion of our audience, right? Low income, undocumented New Yorkers. The largest group of them, of that group is Spanish speakers, but we are opening new verticals in 2023 to cater to Chinese and immigrant communities, which are the 2 next largest communities here in New York City. Other portions of our audience demographic are people who work in immigration. So we do a thrice weekly newsletter called Early Arrival that rounds up local and national immigration news. And the people who read that are immigration attorneys, people who work at DHS, organizers, lawmakers and policymakers, people of that nature. And then I guess maybe adding to some of this reader revenue conversation, the third smallest but growing everyday bucket are sort of civically minded New Yorkers, people who care about the politics of the city and how things are going, and understand that immigration impacts the city in many multifaceted ways. Over half of New Yorkers live in a household that includes somebody who was not born in the United States, which means that over half of New Yorkers are or live with an immigrant, which means that we are, ideally could see our audience grow to be the majority of New Yorkers. And that's sort of where we're heading. But similar to Lupita, we are 5 years old. We have a staff of 14. And we have a development staff of 2, and that is new. So I think it's really important to talk about what your development capacity actually looks like, which is that for the first 18 months of working here up until last October, I was a development staff of 1. And now with this additional capacity, we're excited to be able to do much, much more. But when you are a development staff of 1, you really have to prioritize what is going to see the most results for the amount of capacity and effort that you have. So that's my first sort of thing when we think about what we've done so far that's worked. I had to sit and have a hard think about what was going to actually help Documented grow. And a reader revenue strategy was not going to be that thing. We needed to focus on prioritizing institutional and major gift opportunities. because when you're just one person, you need to go for the income that's going to be the most stable in a structure that is, you know, deeply imperfect, but I think is open to a lot of newsrooms that primarily serve low-income communities, because they understand what an important service that this is, and especially if you are able to sort of tell your story in that way, you could see a lot of early success, you know, on that front, right? And that kind of success allows you to build that stability. So that way, you know, now we have a fabulous new development associate, and hopefully we'll be able to get more into that individual and grassroots giving stuff this year, but that was not the case, right? And so now we have the stability to bring somebody on to be able to focus on all of that stuff. So I really feel like that prioritization is super duper important. We also recently transitioned to being a 501c3. So we had a founding board of 3. We have increased that board to 5, and we're still growing. I think board is a really great way to sort of like think through what your major gift program could look like in terms of trying to solicit gifts from individuals who have a little bit more capacity to add stability to your program. Another thing that we've done is we've worked with readers to determine what kind of experiences they want as donors. We did a big survey of monthly donors, and we found out some things that really surprised me, right? Like, people don't want swag at Documented. They don't want stuff. They don't want to be mailed anything. What they do want is access to experiences. And because of that, we launched a program called Documented Talks, which is a sort of like webinar, lunch and learn type series, where we would bring in industry experts to kind of participate in a panel discussion, anything from cybersecurity to Immigration Judges Union and all sorts of really cool stuff. Those were really well attended, largely by people who were already giving, but also did succeed in getting a few monthly sustainers in there every time. It's currently on hiatus, but we're really excited to be able to bring it back because I think it's something that everybody was really happy and excited to participate in. The other thing is, and I think I already sort of touched on this, which is, you know, mobilize your board. We added 2 new board members to our founding board of 3. One of them has extensive board experience, and he has really taken it upon himself to like bring the others along and lift their confidence in being like, yeah, like this organization's really awesome. And if I am like fundraising on their behalf, like they're not going to embarrass me, and they're going to be like really cool. And if they throw an event and I bring my friends, they're going to think I'm really cool. And if I, you know, ask for gifts to document it for my birthday, like people are going to really like that, right? Like, and things of that nature. So having that one board member who is able to like help move that conversation along and really lift people's confidence and get them excited about fundraising has been huge for us. So that was really good. So the next sort of section is like things we want to do this year. I say this telling you that most of this is completely untested. So we will be learning together, but these are sort of my takeaways and where we're going to be moving in 2023 based on what we've learned from the last couple of years. I really want to move away from donor language that makes people feel like they're buying a product. I feel like it's really, you know, we in nonprofit news, and especially when we talk about reader revenue, we talk about donation as if it's an exchange. I donate, so I receive the news. I donate with the news, and like now I'm a subscriber, I'm a paid reader, or like things of that nature. We're a mission-driven organization. We are an organization that exists to provide news to communities that do not have access to them or trust in the institutions that have traditionally provided that news, right? That is like a good, worthy mission. And like the people who are currently donating to us, they donate to us because of that, right? They donate to us because they have the means to, and they want to see it exist in the world. And like, let's just lean into that, right? Let's talk about language like sustainership and supporter, right? And things of that nature. So really sort of like trying to move in that direction when we think about our reoccurring and grassroots donation programs. We want to do more events. I think this is really common in newsrooms like ours that serve demographics like this, is that we have a small but really mighty fan base. And when we do events, like people show up, like people liked documented talks, and we do one big in-person event a year. It's a birthday party, and like people wanted to come and they wanted to bring people. And it was a really good fundraiser and opportunity for us. Events are a big lift, but I think that if you have like a strong group of people that support you and you're local, so you have most of your people already in one place, it's a really great opportunity to get people together and have them feel more connected to your organization. If your newsroom is focused on something that is sort of like mission aligned, you could find a cool event opportunity maybe with a venue that's mission aligned. A good example of this is we threw a little like individual donor dinner last summer at a restaurant that runs a job training program for local refugees. So that was like a really cool way for us to like really envelop the donors in like the ethos of what we're trying to do. And also like, you know, we paid for the event, so we gave the money to a group that also sort of gets what we're trying to do and is like cool. So we felt really good about that. We're really excited to partner with them again this year. And then the last thing is touching on something that Lupita said, which is like getting people really used to being asked, which is just like ask more. Before I worked here, I spent some time working at an organizing group, and there was this terrific organizer named Elizabeth Owens, who always used to say to me, closed mouths don't get fed. And I think about that all the time as a fundraiser. You know, we need to get people in the habit of understanding, just the same way that we're moving towards this mission-driven language, like that this is a cool cause to support. And like, just the same way that like when you get a little extra money and you want to give to, you know, your food bank or your animal shelter or whatever, like, oh, I'll throw a little money to document it, or it's the holidays, I should put them in my giving, right? Things like that. And I don't think we do that without getting people used to it. So we are going to be asking people more often via our newsletter and some other email campaigns this year. All right, that's it for me. I'm going to pass it to Dana.
All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about our work at 100 Days in Appalachia. We are a very small nonprofit media outlet that was launched the day after the 2016 election. We thought we'd be a 100-day pop-up to counter external national narratives that portrayed the region through simplistic at best and polarizing at worst stereotypes. We try and share the complicated stories of this place by working with local voices to apply a cultural lens to national stories. Our goal is to provide a more collective narrative and also in collaboration with other media in the region. We are a collaborative outlet that highlights communities often not represented in external narratives of Appalachia, from Muslims in Appalachia to Black Appalachia, queer and trans Appalachia, and including younger Appalachians, which is one of the things that I'll talk about today. Most of our reporting comes from media makers living and working in our communities. And most of our revenue goes directly back into the region via these freelancers. So we see ourselves as part of both a narrative and economic engine in the region. And we make sure our readers know that when they donate, they're investing in this place-based network, not just us as a newsroom, but all of the voices that are paid to contribute and be part of this storytelling. I wanted to give a little bit of context too about, we often talk about what we're not also when we're telling our story. So part of the narrative challenge in rural is the pressure to counter historic and negative stereotypes that can then result in actively participating in a kind of what we see as gentrification of rural that focuses on externally defined versions of success stories, like here's all the cool artists and coffee shops and musicians or coal miners coding in tech quarters. We're as hip as Brooklyn and we're as innovative as Silicon Valley. And we reject that because we think that's another kind of damage to the region. So our position is that we do not participate in the erasure of diverse Appalachian realities by assimilating into external narratives and expectations about what is an acceptable way of being in America. So we've been trying to find a very bold, authentic way to, as a community, both acknowledge and own some of the real dystopia present in our rural spaces so that we can move forward while also celebrating actions toward a shared and inclusive future for Appalachians, defined from within. Let me go to my next slide. So policy areas of expertise and topics that we cover have included our investigations and coverage of domestic violent extremism from Pikeville to Charlottesville. We covered the resurgence, we are covering, of escalating organized white supremacy and adjacent activities in the region. We were one of only 6 newsrooms in the country with a reporter in the Capitol on J6. We won a national Edward R. Murrow Award for this work, although I want to emphasize we are a very small, limited resources newsroom, and yet we've been put on target lists next to multi-million-dollar newsrooms like CNN or ProPublica for this work. One of our strategies has been to try and convert this hard-earned, high-risk expertise into support resources for other local and national newsrooms. Well, mostly local, but we also work with national newsrooms, providing training, peer support, and reporting on extremism and reporting on addiction is another topic area. So our Reporting on Extremism project provides training, resources, and peer support to help other under-resourced newsrooms and independent local reporters safely and ethically report on this topic, again, from the realities of what it is actually like working within a region and not coming from outside to do that. And then the Reporting on Addiction project, which is led by our executive editor, Ashton Mara, is a collaborative movement to decrease stigma and improve the media's portrayal of addiction and recovery. We also, we have 2 popular newsletter products, which is honestly, our primary conversion source for subscriptions and individual donations, and driving readers to the website. These feature a variety of voices and perspectives from around the region, often essays offering social commentary, reflection on events, and celebrating diverse aspects of Appalachian and other intersecting identities within the region. We've produced, we have co-produced an audio doc with Reveal, a short doc with The Intercept on J6, which enabled some revenue for us. And we are getting ready we are co-producing a major feature-length documentary called Raised by Wolves that looks at the targeting and susceptibility to domestic violent extremism among young boys in rural region. Let me go to my next slide. Whoops. So one of our most optimistic areas of focus has been on engaging with rural Gen Z. They are brilliant, sensitive experts narrating an increasingly complex Appalachia and rural America that not a lot of people have access to. We experimented with a young Appalachians vertical called the Youth Creators Project. This vertical provides a destination for creative media from young people, from poetry to photography to personal essays to interviews and reporting, exploring their stark realities through a personal lens in this historic time. It also brings a vibrant new network to our 100 Days community that is underserved in most other news media, just young people. That this project drives 20% of traffic on our site annually, reinforces the value and audience for this work, which we are actively cultivating. One of our highest performing stories across all of our content, I mean, ever, is called Holler Y'all and Appalachian Draws, My Childhood of Code Switching in Appalachia, which was authored by a high school senior in Hazard, Kentucky. In addition to co-building that space with them to publish and paying them, we're building what we hope will be an enduring relationship with 100 Days in Appalachia. And we have some other youth-oriented programs for people who are recently eligible to vote in the presidential election, or who will be eligible to vote in the upcoming presidential election. And we're going to be doing some programming around that throughout the region. It is, excuse me, I mean, this is a long cultivation process as far as being an experiment in audience development, but it's one we're willing to invest in because frankly, few people are at this point. And in our recent News Match campaign, we had teenagers helping doing campaigning for that and donating themselves. And we basically created a little mini News Match campaign for them that was ready to go, excuse me, in their socials and via mobile. And we actually had a fantastic conversation just before we started this about exploring some of the ways that young people give and how to make that really seamless and easy for them. Like we were noting the difference between sort of over 25 using Venmo, under 25 using Cash App, and then trying to figure out how do we like integrate and capture that ease of engagement. And you know, in ours, we were more interested in just creating relationships. But if somebody gave $1 or $5, that was fantastic. And it's been really exciting and rewarding for us to see, especially, I mean, these are young people leading this themselves, and their sort of excitement and personal investment in that. And then I wanted to just sort of share the images on this slide is from an event. We did so as part of our documentary film, we invited young people in our community to film the final scene for the doc, which serves as an epilogue. And we basically completely handed over this event to young people. They recruited from their own networks, the musicians for the event. They participated in filming and photography. We had all kinds of different cameras and resources there. We had some folks on hand to help, not that they needed any help. And it actually has turned into it's an exquisite scene that they produced that we're using and the doc and crediting all of the kids who participated in that. And we'd like to do, I mean, this is something now that we want to do more of. And I think that's it for me, and I will pass it on.
Sorry, and I forgot to unmute myself. I'm Marcia Maziars from the Prison Journalism Project. I had the fundraising efforts for PJP. PJP's mission is to train incarcerated writers to be journalists and to publish their stories. We believe that only when we learn about what life is like on the inside can we have a meaningful discussion on criminal justice reform. And we're committed to giving the incarcerated a voice in criminal justice reform. We launched in April of 2020 as an all-volunteer organization with an operating budget of a little under $50,000. We've had a lot of growth, and we finished this last year, 2022, with an operating budget of a little over $670,000, 8 full-time employees, 68 editorial volunteers. We published 685 stories, and we raised more than $700,000, with 60% of that coming from foundations and 40% coming from individuals. And that includes major donors and small dollar donors. Our fundraising goal for this year is a little bit more than $1 million. You can see from this slide that our audience and the community that we serve is anyone with a stake in criminal justice, civil rights, and public safety. We have a few challenges. It's difficult to raise dollars from incarcerated individuals due to lack of their own financial resources and the barriers in communicating and engaging with them in a regular way. We also have to work around people's complicated feelings about crime, punishment, and incarceration. And on a practical level, as noted before by Andrea, our staff, our development staff, is a staff of 1. That's me. Though I am hiring a major gifts officer, and I am actually going to drop the job description into the chat. So if you know of anyone, please share it with them. We've done a number of things, I think, to help make us successful. And one of the most important things is that I have incredible support from our co-founders, Yukari Kane and Shaheen Pasha. And they made a very bold decision, I think, which is when PJP received its 2 first major foundation grants, they made the decision to hire a development director before adding to the newsroom. And I know that in one of yesterday's sessions with Searchlight New Mexico, Sarah and Tamara talked a lot about this and how Sarah resisted hiring a development professional and was so glad when she did. So I have their support and they've been fabulous. And as Andrea also mentioned, with a small team, I have to focus on where I'm going to raise my money. And my focus really is right now on foundations and major donors. I'm moving to the next slide. Oops, no. I have 2 strategies. PJP has 2 strategies that influence our fundraising program. Ask everyone you know and ask everyone who knows you. And I'll just spend a few minutes talking about that. Ask everyone you know. I mean, really, we ask everyone we know. We are our leadership team, our board of directors, our advisory board, our colleagues, friends. We ask everyone that we know to help connect us with partners. We really feel like, getting that email introduction is beneficial for us. And once we get our foot in the door, we will do our best to try and partner with people and get people excited about our work. We've had good luck doing that. People are willing to help us out. I think they're so thrilled we're not asking them for money, that we're just asking them to make an introduction, and they've been very gracious. Sometimes it doesn't work out so great. An example is we had a couple of connections with Craig Newmark, and we know that Craig likes very short and pithy pitches. So we sent him one, and we almost immediately got back a very short and pithy response, which was no. So, we were disappointed, but, Craig was very gracious and offered to tweet out our stories and what we've been working on and what we're doing. And I was thrilled with that because that helps us get in front of as many people as possible. And so I'm really grateful for his support in that way. But sometimes, asking everyone does work out. And speaking of social media, we use social media as a big driver for our fundraising. And we're very fortunate that our board chair, Wes Lowry, who is a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, is very supportive of us, and he agrees once a year to amplify our fundraising. He did that in our News Match campaign at the end of this past year. And to give you an example, Wes has quite a large Twitter following, and he tweeted out the campaign and urged his followers to support PJP. And within 24 hours of his tweet, we raised over $5,600 in online donations from his followers. And a lot of that was small dollar donors and small dollar donations. And believe me, they really add up, and we appreciate each and every one. 24 hours after his first tweet, we received a $10,000 gift from the Long Lead Media Group. And they challenged Wes's followers to match that $10,000. And a few days later, an individual did indeed match that $10,000 gift. And when I reached out to him and asked him how he had heard about PJP and why he had decided to support us with such a generous gift, his response was, I just was answering Wes's tweet. So ask everyone you know. It really, really makes a difference. And as you can see from the second part of my slide, ask everyone who knows you. This is something that I really took to heart this past fall. I attended the Lion Conference in Austin, and I went to a panel on funding sustainable news that actually was moderated by Jim Friedlich here from Lenfest. And one of the participants was Lolly Bowen, who many of you know is a program officer at the Ford Foundation. And during her remarks, Lolly said something that really struck me, and I'm paraphrasing. She said, don't just focus on getting in front of new funders. Remember to ask those who've already made an investment in your work. And that's something that really struck me, because I think as development professionals, we're always, trying to balance going back to the well too many times. But in December, I decided to test out Lolly's suggestion. We had a number of things that we wanted to do at PJP, and we just didn't have the capacity to see them through. And so I contacted my program officer at the Just Trust. The Just Trust has awarded PJP a 2-year grant, and we were in the middle of that grant cycle. And I reached out to my program officer and I told her about some of the things that we wanted to do and let her know that we just didn't have the ability to do them. And I asked her if she and the Just Trust would consider a mid-cycle grant. And she basically said, send me an email and give me 2 to 3 big ticket items and 2 to 3 smaller, more immediate needs. And I'll take it back and I'll see what I can do for you. I was really surprised and pleased. And it was at the end of the calendar year. And I figured, maybe there was some discretionary money left over and we might get, $10,000, which I would be grateful for. A couple of days later, the program officer sent us an email and let us know that the Just Trust had decided to make a one-time increase to our 2022 grant payment of $100,000, and that we were able to use this money in any way that we saw fit. So ask everyone who knows you. Thank you, Just Trust, and thank you, Lolly Bowen. I sent Lolly a follow-up email to let her know about this development, and she sent me a lovely email back, and I just want to read a sentence from her email because I think it's really important. Developing deeper and stronger commitments from your current supporters not only helps your bottom line, but it demonstrates to potential partners that your current funders are really in the trenches with you. And I think that's really important to remember for all of us. So when we were talking about the presentation, we were asked to leave you with an uplifting and gratifying moment. And that certainly was one, but I have an even better one for you that I want to share. This summer, we did a small crowdfunding campaign to raise money to pay our incarcerated writers, because that's something that we feel very strongly about. Most of our donations came online, but we did get a couple through the mail. And we received a letter from an incarcerated person in Michigan who had recently read an issue of our training newspaper that we send to all of our incarcerated writers and to prison libraries throughout the country. And he had written about how inspired he had been reading this prison newspaper and reading about the stories from other incarcerated persons throughout the country. And he was really blown away by it and inspired. And he was really grateful for the work that we did. And he wanted to enclose a donation. And inside his letter was a check for $1,000. It was pretty incredible. And actually, we immediately contacted our fiscal sponsor because we just assumed there was a typo and that, there were a couple of zeros added. But it really was a check for $1,000. And to put that into context, according to the Prison Policy Initiative, incarcerated persons in Michigan make anywhere from 14 cents to 56 cents an hour. So his gift was equivalent to 1 year's full-time wages. And, that was just really incredible. And even now I'm kind of tearing up because, fundraising and raising money is hard and it's relentless and it's often discouraging. But there's always something positive to celebrate. And so whenever I get discouraged, I think back on this gift from this incarcerated gentleman in Michigan, and it makes me realize that what I do and what PJP does matters. and has value and has impact. And I know that every one of you has a story like that. And I just encourage you to remember those stories when things get down, because it's really important, and what we do matters. Anyway, thank you so much. I really learned a lot from my colleagues, and I'm hoping and that you have questions, and we'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Marcia. Thank you, Dana and Andrea and Lupita. I think that was a tremendously informative and particularly uplifting series of stories from each of you. I actually got tears a little bit during your story, Marcia, as well. I thought maybe we could just jump into a couple of the things that we've talked about in our prep session, and other folks can throw questions in the Q&A if you want. I know a number of them have been answered already by each of you. There were a couple of questions in the Q&A about balancing, juggling. I don't even know if it's balancing or is juggling your time when it's a small team or it's just you. Somebody said they're an editor, they have no money, right? And they have to balance. And Lupita, you started to answer that, I think, or somebody did in the Q&A. How do you sort of prioritize your work? How do you deal with setting goals and sort of setting a framework that you're going to march along, not only for yourself, but also to bring your organization along with you? I know, Lupita, in our prep, you mentioned setting qualitative goals in addition to data or number focused goals as sort of a method to keep you focused and prioritized and bring people along with you. Is that right?
Yeah, so two things here. First, leaning on people in your network who are mentors. So I mentioned in my answer in the Q&A, 3 things that Enlace did to keep this work focused, right? Because it was really just myself and Paola doing this development work. And one of them was creating a spreadsheet of or foundations that we had identified as potential funders, right? To keep that work focused, because if there's no strategy, right? And if you're not prioritizing that, it's really easy to get overwhelmed. And while I was developing that, I really leaned on people like Lizzie Hazeltine from North Carolina Local News Lab Fund. She was great, and she was able to say, hey, we might know somebody here, or this is the person who you should get in contact with. So just like having those approaches under your belt, like that really worked for us. Yes, there was a second point. Annie, will you remind me what specifically you had asked me about? That was my second point, but I lost my train of thought there.
No, not at all. I was just asking how you set qualitative and quantitative goals to prioritize your work and bring everybody along with you.
Yeah, thank you so much for reminding me of that. So yeah, that's so important, because in our case, we haven't been as successful with reader revenue, right? And the reason I do that is because this evolved into, well, what does success actually, asking ourselves, what does success actually mean, right? When we did the collaboration with Documented and El Tímpano, Enlace had maybe like 8 or 9 donations that came out of that. And I think we all had pretty like low numbers, but collectively we decided, is that how we're defining success? I mean, yeah, there were 9 donors, but like in our case, more than half of those were new. So those were new people coming into our pool of supporters, right? And also we got so many encouraging messages of support. And once we started framing everything under we're growing, right? We're all playing the long game of reader revenue here. Those messages really helped us to feel seen. And we also saw that as a win. So I think that you should really set qualitative goals around your initiatives and your campaigns. And I think that will really help you better understand how you are progressing through these challenges.
Thanks. I wonder, Lupita and Andrea, if you could talk a little bit about the collaboration you did also with El Tímpano for Giving Tuesday. Why did you decide to do that? How did it work? Were there challenges in this sort of collaborative model that would be pearls of wisdom that you would offer to others thinking about doing the same thing? And then there was a question in the chat also about how do you follow up with small donors, which I think all of us could answer, but that might be a great place to start that conversation as well.
Lupita, do you want to go first? Because I know it was your idea. You brought it to us, and then maybe I could talk about the rest of it, or
Yeah, I think so first of all, we did a collaborative Giving News Day campaign. And really the first challenge was, what can we actually do? We had initially planned something, or we had thought about doing like a longer collaboration that would maybe go the 2 months of Newsmatch, but then we quickly realized that's not going to be possible. So we backtracked a little bit and decided, let's just focus on one day, and made the goal to develop shared messaging around the need to support immigrant serving newsrooms as we go through these campaigns, right? Because the reality is, you know, it is harder for us to get those donations from our audience because of the challenges that I mentioned in my intro. So there a lot of great things came of this, including the encouragement that I also mentioned already, but also just having each other as a point of reference, I think was probably the biggest win. We all shared that. It was just really great to know that we are not on our own. We can now, we do feel like we're a little cohort of newsrooms with shared challenges around not just revenue, but audience engagement and all sorts of things. So that was really great for us. And what we did really well, I think, was to establish like, what are our key deliverables for this day? So we developed a really great email that we could have sent to our network contacts. We started identifying who in our shared network is connected to or potentially connected to national foundations that are interested in our collective mission. And then that also resulted in a more ambitious plan for the next year, with a broader goal of just bringing awareness to the specific challenges that these newsrooms face.
Yeah, it was really a fruitful collaboration in so many ways. I think one thing that, you know, the encouragement that Lupita cites was really helpful. And I think it's also important to note that it came from funders. Like we sent the letter to a lot of our funders, and largely in hopes that they would like spread the word or be happy that we were doing something together and things like that. And also a little bit of funder education, which I know has come up in the Q&A, which is like, this is what it's like for us. And we don't fit, like, this is how we operate within your portfolio. And like, you know, I think that the reaction from funders not only helped sort of like get them closer to like understanding our unique position, but yeah, also like was a really cool way to showcase the work. So it's like, that was like a good win because it like helped us get closer to them. And that was really, really cool. It also, to Lupita's point, was a really great way of prioritizing the work. You know, we had big dreams. I think we still have big dreams, but we were able to do what we knew could get done, right? And so we executed on that, and we're really happy with the way that went. And then I guess maybe the last thing that comes to my mind is this community of support. I think it was really cathartic for us. Like to read each other's writing, and like, you know, like the thing we ended up sending out is a little bit like a manifesto of sorts. And it really did feel like something that felt really nice to read and nice to share with each other. And I do think, you know, something that's come up in the planning session of this panel is the concept of a community of support for fundraisers who are in this unique situation, and ways in which we could work together, and ways in which we could better showcase our work in our unique place in the news ecosystem. And so that's something that I think all four of us are interested in exploring, and maybe a follow-up from this session. Just to go to Annie's question, which is in the Q&A around following up with new smaller donors. For us, everybody gets a thank you. So everybody gets thanked. And then we have sort of like if you give a certain amount, for us, it's $250. Like I send an extra thanks. It's like, thank you so much. Why, tell us a little bit about you, right? Like something like that. And if somebody gives 500 or higher, you could set this for whatever you want. You could do it for monthly donors. You could do it for whatever. Then they get an invitation to meet with us and like hang out and talk about the work and things like that. A lot of those people don't take us up on it, but that is the practice for us.
I just wanted to say one thing that we did with our News Match campaign was that everyone got a thank you for their donation, but in the thank you, we added a link to a Spotify playlist that comprised songs that our incarcerated writers had given us. And we put together this playlist of what they were listening to inside in 2022. And so it was a playlist of about 100 songs. And we got a lot of great response from people like, oh my gosh, thanks for this playlist. This is really awesome. Thank you so much. And it was an easy thing to do. And we just put the link in the acknowledgement letter. And it was a nice thing that we could do for everyone, not just for someone who gave us $1,000 or more.
That's great. The more creative ways we can reach out to our donors, and a lot of it doesn't cost us any money, just a little bit of creative thinking and a little bit of time. To Andrea's point about the community of practice, just very quickly, the Lenfest Institute hosts a variety of different communities of practice, the News Philanthropy Network being one of them. If you all or anybody on this session or anyone out in the community thinks that having a networked community of practice where you can all share ideas and best practices and challenges and just not feel quite so all alone in what you're doing, please reach out to me or to Allie and let us know. And we'll look into whether or not we have, we can create another one and work with you to design that to meet your needs, but help to sort of facilitate and administer it so that you have a place to go to see your peers and don't have to be thinking about who you need to call to find out information from. So just let us know. We only have a couple minutes left, but Dana, you said something really interesting in the prep session, that we all try lots of different things to innovate, and how frustrating it is sometimes that there's this expectation that those of us who are among the least resourced and or working with audiences who are the least resources are expected to innovate. And that's a huge burden on top of everything else that you have to do and what goes on. And anybody, please answer this. But Dana, there was a question also, a couple questions in the Q&A about how do you balance making sure that other people's expectations of what you should be doing with innovation or sponsor success, or the board thinks it should be a certain way. How do you manage through all of that and keep on the path?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I do think, and I have participated in the idea that we're going to innovate our way out of this and have been very, early adopt this, early adopt that. But 15 years later, nobody's cracked the nut really. And that doesn't matter whether you're like us, a very undersourced newsroom, or whether you're like a really, which I keep finding out how richly endowed some of these other newsrooms are. And so I just want to remind people that think about where you're putting that innovation burden and what you're asking of folks, because I frankly think that the fact that we exist at all is a phenomenal innovation and one worth investing in. And then I would say also that I think there has been sort of a historic kind of legacy lack of reluctance to invest in newsrooms, because there's this idea, well, they didn't do what they were supposed to do 20 years ago, so too bad. And nobody could say that any of us are not working our asses off on reader revenue and revenue strategies and trying all of the things, and that sometimes those don't work or don't work at a level to enable us to be sustainable is not because there is anything wrong with our orgs or the work that we're doing, which also is partly why I love that you have put together this panel about what it is really like to serve underserved communities where there's a lack of wealth, because that, and then I would also add that funders should recognize, as a lot of folks are wrestling with basically some real threats and to democracy and all of the collapses of trust in larger institutions, you know, we're here and we're doing this work. And I think people like to invest in big things, but investing in small things can have, I think, particularly at this moment in time, an outsized impact.
Well, I think you're absolutely right about that, Dana. And I think we all need to be paying attention, not just to the big projects, but to what people like to call microsites that probably have even the most impact of anybody, because it's so immediate and so connected to community. I've often thought that raising money for a hospital or a school is the easiest money to raise. And raising money for organizations like yours is really, really challenging. So hats off to all of you and to everyone else on this call on this session who are working through some of the same issues. You guys are great leaders. Thank you for sharing your wonderful stories and your work and your uplifting moments that we can all take with us and remind ourselves that this is really, really important work, and we just got to keep moving along. So thank you. I really appreciate that.